So I think we might now start. And of course, we use many languages here, but we have the simultaneous interpretation, so there is no problem. So we'll have English and Italian and French. I don't know, Inna, you are there. Do you speak French or English today?
Today I will speak English.
Voilà, c'est parfait. Okay. So we have many languages, but no problem. And so I'm joining only today to this great, very important symposium on Nizami&Dante. So I'm very glad to be invited, honored to be invited here. So I'm very most curious of what you will be saying. And I suppose because the time is rather limited, I think only 15 minutes for each one to speak and then discussion. We should now start right now. And I have taken a print of the old-fashioned of the program. And I suppose that, yes, the theme of this session is Semiotics and Medievality. That is the very general title for all your speeches, covering all your aspects. So I think we must start. And the first speaker is Merkoulova from Paris or Moscow. I don't know how would you say so. In many places. And your title will be The Space of Dante's Divine Comedy in the Semiotics of Yuri Lotman, the great Russian Estonian Tartu scholar. So you are welcome.
Thank you, dear Professor Tarasti. It's a great pleasure to see you. And I'd like, first of all, to many thanks to the organizers. Thanks to Rahila Gibulaeva for inviting me to this so important and topical conference. I present some reflections in the framework of this international scientific conference, Cross-Cultural Matches, Nizami&Dante, dedicated to the 880th birthday of Nizami Gangevi and the 700th anniversary of Dante Alighieri. And now I will try to make my presentation, just a few seconds. I hope it will be okay. Is it okay now? You can see my presentation? Yes? Nice. So, memorable dates and anniversary are themselves a semiotic phenomenon. Semiotics deals with the phenomena of meaning. It builds a general image of science and texts that make up the history of human culture. In this sense, we should understand the statement of the famous Russian philologist and semiotician Vyacheslav Всеволодовich Ivanov. The task of semiotics is to describe the semiosphere, without which a noosphere is unthinkable. Semiotics should help us to navigate history. Therefore, memorable dates, anniversary of prominent personalities, writers and scientists serve as a kind of cultural reference points. It is no coincidence that in the UNESCO system, there is a whole program of memorable dates, international dates, international decades, and anniversary from 100 years and above, aimed at promoting intercultural dialogue and tribute to the memory of outstanding personalities who contributed to the construction of human civilization. Recent examples of UNESCO anniversaries include the Congress of the French Semiotic Association, for example, on the 100th anniversary of the birth of the founder of the Paris Semiotic School, Algidar Greimas. And this year, the conference of on the centenary of the living French philosopher and sociologist Edgar Morin. In 2022, the scientific community awaits the centenary of the birth of the founder of the Moscow Tartu Semiotic School, Yuri, and the 60th anniversary of the first symposium on the structural study of science systems at the Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow, which became an impetus for the development of semiotics in Russia and also in the world. According to the well-known expression of Yesenin, the big is seen at a distance, and therefore the anniversaries of the great authors Nizami&Dante are a wonderful opportunity to look at their texts from the point of view of semiotic at the end of the 20th century, of evolution, from semiotics of culture of Lotman to the semiotics of passion of Greimas and Fontani and the bodily semiotics of Marcella Castellano. Divine comedy is a symbolic space in the conception of Yuri Lotman. The image of the artist creator underlines many of Yuri Lotman's semiotic analyses. One of the striking examples is the chapter Semantic Intersection as a Semantic Explosion, Inspiration, of his last work, Culture and Explosion, in 1992. There is the book, and there is also a translation into French that I made in France. La culture et l'explosion. Explosion et la culture in French. Culture and explosion. So, in Culture and Explosion, Lotman refers to texts of Pushkin and Bloch and describes creative inspiration as a greatest tension, an explosion, a person out of the sphere of logic into the area of unpredictable creativity. The entire process of creativity is a kind of tension that makes the translatable, where the inexpressible inspiration is cast into poetic words. In the book Universe of the Mind, Lotman pays special attention to the so-called symbolic spaces that are built by the artist, the writer, and the poet. From the point of view of the Moscow Tartu Semiotic School, Dante Alighieri could most accurately be called an architect, although he compared himself to a geometer, because the entire Divine Comedy is a huge architectural structure, the construction of the universe. According to Lotman, Dante's world is a huge message from its creator, a mysterious message that might be deciphered. The world, as a product of creativity, is endowed with purpose and meaning. About every detail of it, you can ask, what does it mean? The universe is presented as a semiotic text awaiting its decoder. Dante, the narrator, simultaneously possesses the point of view of both the creator and the person. For the space building that he constructs in his text, the top-bottom axis is of particular importance. The first meaning of the up-down axis is valid only within the S. Down is the center of gravity of the globe, and up is any direction from the radius to the center. The second meaning of the axis is the absolute, top and bottom, as pointed out by the philosopher and mathematician Pavel Florensky. In the cosmic scheme of the Divine Comedy, space is organized into the idea of Aristotle. The northern hemisphere is at the bottom of the earth, as less perfect, and the southern hemisphere is at the top. Dante and his companion Virgil, following this scale up-down, descend into the depths of the S from its surface to the center. But paradoxically, at the same time, they rise up in relation to the relation of the world axis. The paradox can be explained in the context of Dante's semiotics, where a special meaning is attributed to each special category. According to Lotman, Dante's relationship between expression and content is devoid of the traditional conventions of semiotic systems. We are not talking about science, but about symbols in the terminology of Saussure. In the terminology of Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite, Dante's symbols really show the world of superbeing at the level of being. The content of the symbol, as it were, shines through in it and shines through the brighter, the closer the object or creature is to the heavenly light of truth. At the highest level of the universal hierarchy, we can directly contemplate the truth with a spiritual eye. At the lower level, it takes on the character of purely conventional science. Sinners and demons use purely conventional science, so they can lie and deceive. Righteous people, if they use conventional science, do not harm them, do not use their conventional nature for evil. In the Divine Comedy, the entire semantic architectonics of the text is organized around the top-bottom axis, and Dante's movement in the text is always either a descent or ascent. At the same time, as Lotman notes, behind a real descent or ascent, a spiritual fall or ascension always shines through. Dante and Virgil descend into hell, and their movement signifies a descent downward. But at the same time, the descent of the heroes is also the ascent in the spiritual sense. Particular attention of Lotman's semiotics in Dante's text is the non-trivial distribution of sins in terms of punishment. The author of the Divine Comedy offers his own interpretation of the severity of sins, far from church norms and everyday ideas. Medieval readers were surprised by the fact that Dante's hypocrites are placed into the sixth slot of the eighth circle, and the heretics are much higher in the sixth circle. As for modern readers, we are surprised when we see murderers in the first ditch of cycle 8, and counterfeiters in the depths, in the 10th slot of cycle 8. However, according to Lotman, such a distribution is strictly logical. If some actions falsify or violate the true connections between content and expression, then they are worse than murder, since they kill the truth and are the source of lies in all its infernal essence. Dante builds a special model of the world as a definite continuum. It contains individual trajectories of individual paths and destinies. After death, the soul of a person makes a certain path of the world continuum, as a result of which it is placed in a space corresponding to its moral value. Righteous souls are in blissful rest. Sinners are in eternal cyclical movement. And only Dante himself, the author and narrator, has freedom of movement, since, as Lotman notes, his upward movement includes the knowledge of all paths, both truth and false. The body and the fear of the invisible. Dante is interpreted by Marcello Castellano. Marcello Castellano is an Italian semiotician of the Paris School of Grammars, and he devoted a number of works to the analysis of Dante's text. And I would like to draw special attention to one of these texts. It's a Castellano speech at the International Semiotic Seminar in Paris, published then in the journal New Semiotic Acts. In the preface to Castellano's analysis, the French semiotician Jacques Montagny notes that at the end of the 20th century, a turning point occurred in European semiotics, and the semiotic function was revised. The relations of expression and content are no longer considered to be relations of the order of logical presupposition. The two planes of language were combined not purely logically, but through proprioceptivity, participation in content, to feel the semiotic phenomenon of tension, and to expression, to express the semiotic phenomenon of phoria. In the analysis of the Divine Comedy, which Castellano proposes, the medium between expression and content within the perception is carried out not only through the body, but also within the body. And this phenomenon should be carefully studied. According to Castellano, Dante's text shows that the body is no longer just a means of unifying semiotic existence, combine the interoceptive and exteroceptive planes on the basis of which the two planes of language arise. The body itself is a place of meaningful articulations, and therefore the future of semiotic research, as Castellano believes, is the topics of semiotics of the natural bodies. The first song introduces the theme of fear and its variety, horror, on which the relationship between the human and the sacred is built. In the midway of this our mortal life, I found me in a gloomy wood. According to Castellano, fear, horror, at the level of utterance, is the maker of the recognition of the subject traveler, any of us in a similar situation of entering an unknown world experiences similar feeling. The opposition between the individual and the collective, we, mortal life, having passed away, I found myself. And another opposition between the space of life and the realm of non-life, life forest. Our life, a gloomy forest. Fear occurs a real taste. It is bitter, and the forest is compared to the realm of non-life, to death. He is so bitter that death is almost sweeter. Fear appears as a certain form that allows us, readers, to identify ourselves with the speaking subject. This person is like us. We, like him, are afraid of the unknown. Further, we observe a gradual release from fear. According to the narrator, if someone wants to climb up, he must be below. And this is the only way to start the ascent. When moving upward, the fear of the invisible, the absence of other living beings, gives way to another fear, the fear of a specific personified danger. The latter appears in the form of animals, lion, lynx, and she-wolf. With him is a she-wolf. In Castellano's interpretation, the experience of the storyteller's passions plays the role of a connecting link that ensures a harmonious linear sequence of Dante's text. The point of view of bodily semiotics and semiotics of passions on Dante's text allows Castellano to come to the following conclusion. The S builds a whole system of relations with the body and the cosmos, on the basis of which the meaning of the story, la signification du récit, in French, arises. And all this happens before the appearance of any form of linguistic coding. And now I will pass to my conclusion. The analysis of the Divine Comedy from the point of view of the semiotics of culture, Lotman, and the semiotics of passions and bodily semiotics, Greimas and Fontani, Castellana, reveals one of the key features of the Dante's text. The author thinker, with his special concept of God and evil, and with bodily somatic manifestations of human nature and emotions, is an integrated part of the cosmos. He is alien of the isolation of the individual, the separation of science and morality, which will come in the era following Dante's time. As Lotman writes, Dante Alighieri's encyclopedism of knowledge, which included almost the entire arsenal of science of his time, did not add up in his mind to the sum of disparate information, but formed a single integrated building, which merged into the harmonic structure of the cosmos. And it was about this author thinker that the great French poet Victor Hugo wrote in the 19th century. Crossing the road on one evening, I met a traveler. He is in a consular toga. He seemed to be dressed. Then he was born a lion, dreamed among the deserts. And on the gloomy night, I sent my roar from the prairie. Now I am a man. I am Dante Alighieri. Thank you for your attention, and I will wait for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Inna Merkoulova, for this very, very exciting speech. Indeed, very nice. And certainly this evokes many ideas and many issues. But is it here habit that we take some questions immediately after each speech or all at the end?
After, please, if possible, after, at the end of each panel, please.
At the end only. Okay, but let me only say that it is fascinating, this Lotman idea of the sign becoming symbol, so as a kind of signe marqué or foregrounded, and then of course the idea that the whole Dantean universe is like this bottom-up model. It's the same like the model for reconstruction of ancient texts by we'll have phonetic symbol, or maybe, and then Marcello Castellano, our good friend. Fantastic that they took his ideas. So thank you very much indeed. No, anyway, because time is limited, we have to go continue, and then we may return to Inna's presentation at the end. Now, next speaker, I would like to Anna Piacella. Sì, voglio presentare, ma forse non in italiano, forse in inglese o... sì, Anna Rita Piacella, Università di Roma 3, Italia. Titolo della sua presentazione, Dico d'amore, cosa per sé, la personificazione di amore nella vita nuova. So you are most welcome here.
Grazie professore, grazie agli organizzatori di questo splendido convegno.
I'm always impacted, just the connection was restored right now, sorry. In fact, in this last expression of the dominance of love that is reflected in Dante's poems reveals the sweetness of love. And there are various expressions like ego dominius cus et deus fortio mi, or well, the holy Jehovah speaks of his love. Therefore, we're speaking of the initial phases of love and the morality of those dedicated to it, and the relations towards them. And in fact, the love in Dante's interpretation is something that ends up with physical death. And this is viewed as a very progressive idea for its time. And I would even say that love is shown as a kind of idol. And in the 7th chapter, the transformation of body, carnal transformation, is making human body something very relative. And in section 5, the phenomena imagined by Francesca, we can trace them. So she kissed me, or with sweet words, and she had frozen my heart with her attitude. So with her will, the relations between the will and love is clearly expressed. And in chapter 1, these expressions are found, and in later parts, the imagination and the images shifted, and it becomes more and more dangerous. In chapter 1, the spirits are presented as phenomenon in itself. And Dante writes, you're always with me, and to be with me is courage in itself, and love is so noble. Well, and I can never imagine you without that. In chapter 7, the transformation ideas are presented very clearly. So love is shown as a destructive force as well. And we can actually trace the senses of characters of Dante in their transformation. So we try to see it in that particular way. So physical and moral capacities are given priority. And in this way, from chapter 1 to chapter 5, we see the differences. So in later on, these stories of Francesca's love, her ability to manage her senses, her love, and it happens throughout her whole life. And in Vita Nova, as it is the case in Vita Nova, the dominance of love is oftentimes presented as a negative phenomenon, because Francesca starts realizing her sins, and her adoration with love is very important. So in her very sincere and strong explanations, she mentions that those who feel love and those who do not, are capable of either getting or losing their freedom, and they are more prone to divine sentiments. In Vita Nova, those following their feelings of love are shown in their naked essence, like it is shown in chapters 5 and 7. And starting from chapter 5 onwards, these sensitive spirits of love are becoming a central composition in a way. So these are another character is shown through the prism of love. In Vita Nova, chapter 5, there is arrogance of love that is shown, and in grammatic manner the concept is being revealed, and welcoming Beatrice, which was an unbelievable happiness for Dante. So this happiness is presented in Dante's verses, and this feeling of happiness and adoration are actually getting to clemency and mercy. So the Trinity expression of them shows that love for Dante's characters unites their bodies and their will. And as it is shown in chapter 1, the sweetness of love is prevailing, and the same dynamics is true with Francesca. Paula and Francesco are penning the book of love, and reading that book of love, they try to protect themselves from negative intents. They are thinking of their physical beauty. And in chapter 5 of Vita Nova, we can see that the episode in chapter 7 seems to be similar to that. But that is all shown in a way that when the heroes are confused, when Beatrice denies the welcoming remark by Dante, so the expression of love leads to more tragic outcomes. And in the beginning of the chapter, there is transformation that is shown, and in chapters 7 and 9, that's how they express this. Writing in this way about love is something that depletes the forces of any person. Therefore, Beatrice continues writing and demands that from Dante from chapter 10 onwards. Dante is speaking of tender love, and this love is, or the dominance of love that could be fatal for him, is something he is trying to get rid of, and some unexpected events start happening to him. So these general expressions actually are more used in this case. So in chapter 5, depicting Inferno, Dante shows the selfishness of heroes, the selfishness of Francesca that leads to her ultimate demise and defeat. And in section 5, chapter 5, love becomes a paganic symbol. So in Purgatoria, chapter 24, we can see similar episodes that were expressed in Vita Nova, in the presentation of love through the prism of Christian values, and the allegory of love is clearly presented in this manner. Therefore, in chapter 5, Dante tries to define love, something that we see in section 24 of Purgatory. I would like to read this. I told him, whenever I am in danger, love is standing guarantor and guardian to me. And this love is carrying a huge meaning for me. So with that, Dante tries to actually follow the guidelines of divine forces, and the coming to Christian values, while the direct connection to the Lord is very important for him, and this is presented in a poetic manner. Therefore, we are not moving far away from the literary meaning of Dante's words, stating that love is a divine force. And in chapter 16 of Vita Nova, we also see the didactic elements of love, which Dante is very masterfully taking benefit of. And Dante, with his lines, using this formula, tries to express the way he understands love, and he does it in a very clear and expressive manner. Therefore, in chapter 16, he adds the rhetoric function to love, and by doing that, he indicates that by using poetic language, he's trying to explain this concept. Therefore, Saint Thomas, in biblical allegories, actually is reflected in Dante's descriptions. So as far as Beatrice is concerned, imagining paradise through love also gets this allegorical concept of love. And in the Holy Book, we see that in the Bible, and the way it is presented in Bible, we know it. Coming to Beatrice, the love towards her is anthropomorphic. So there are no false visions and biblical allegories in the real sense of the word are getting the reader involved, and it has a huge pedagogical and didactic impact. And in Divine Comedy, Dante tries to use these allegories. The specificity of Vita Nova is that it has a variety of functions, both didactic and pedagogical. And in the sections related to Beatrice, we may conclude today that in Vita Nova, we actually get this allegoric images, which are absolutely clear. And from this point of view, any comparison will bring us to this conclusion once again. So with that, I would like to conclude. Thank you, Anna Rita Pacetta. Pichalla, you expressed in a very clear way the concepts of love and the manifestations of love in Dante's works. And of course, in our discussions, we will continue that and get back to that points. So now we will continue our presentations. And the next speaker is Mr. Rafael Husseinov, the director of the Nizami National Literature Museum of Azerbaijan. And Mr. Husseinov is going to speak of the real life and human being behind divine and historical layer of Nizami's Khamsa and Dante's Divine Comedy. Distinguished have a different view sense that I am the only person who lives and works in Nizami's museum, a person who was born in 880 years ago, and the museum that I had was built 80 years ago. So spirit of Nizami is always with me. He's next to me, and one of his poems, Layla and Majnun, when he started the poem, he faced the havens and he said, he wrote, "Oh, the name that is the start of everything. Not a single word of mine is going to be penned without your blessing." So for me, it is easier to start because I'm guided by two outstanding names, Dante and Nizami, and the year of 2021 that is coming to the end. But in 1899, 120 years ago, Rudyard Kipling penned a work that is called East and West. And in that work, Rudyard Kipling, he said, East is East and West in West will never be together. They will never come together. 120 years passed by. And by the early 21st century, in 2021, 120 years after he wrote that, even though East is East and West and West, they have always been together. They have been always complementing on each other. And it's the mix of these two cultures. It's their ability to enrich each other that made the world such a beautiful place to be. And one of the followers of Nizami, Mevlana Jamaleddin Rumi, used to write in his Masnavis, Mazlum-e Gurum, so he was writing that we came to accommodate each other. We are here to bring people together, not to divide them. And from the point of the legacy of Dante Nizami is something I would like to draw attention at, even though it looks very abstract. You always feel the epic of any work, even though it's maybe hidden. However, starting from language and style, all the way to some historic elements, they do recreate the historic context. And there are some enciphered codes by the writers that still reveal their respective time and make it possible for us to see the time period, the historic background behind every work. And it's far not by chance that a number of medieval researchers, well, together with the researchers of later period, well, we're trying to track the time and the context. And in Hamse, this collection of 5 poems, they could see the time of Nizami. They therefore they considered Hamse the mirror reflecting its time. The same holds true with Divine Comedy, that is presented by a number of researchers as an encyclopedia of medieval Europe, along with some specific features. It is a great advantage of Nizami for the Oriental culture, and Dante predetermined Dante's role in the Renaissance in Europe, while closeness to royal court politicized in a way their works. In case of Nizami, there were a lot of court poets, which never happened to Nizami. And even sometimes when they used to write some of their verses and they praised their rulers of the day and made some eulogies to them, they still were able to convey their own message. And that is exactly what happens to Nizami. So this is one of the important problems of Hamse, Nizami's Hamse. They are the works that reflect his philosophical views and realistic approaches. So in Hamse lines, the dedications to love, to the Almighty, raises his elevation to the sky. And in the meantime, he covers his time and period, and he writes about ordinary people. And his aspiration to create the just kingdom. And well, it's not only confined to the appeals or criticism towards the rulers. Well, he was writing some universal messages to the rulers of both his time and the time afterwards. Therefore, some of his messages, or most of his messages, are valid to this day. And he was writing his advice to the rulers of both the rulers of today and tomorrow. The same thing can be traced in Dante's works. In his Inferno section, he has some political motifs, and the tough attitude towards Dante by the rulers of the day, while even though it's shown as making Dante kind of martyr. It really is the message is very clear, and the political motivation was sensible that resulted in Dante's persecution. If there are people who are comparing Dante's poetry with a beautiful Gothic church, and they outline the Divine Comedy that is a mirror of its time in a way. So I would like to speak of something that brings together Dante and Nizami, because geniuses may live in various time periods and in various parts of the world, but by the essence, by their nature, they're pretty close to each other. And even though they lived in different geographies and wrote in various languages, they have commonalities in both their personal lives and their legacy. There are some striking intercultural commonalities in their works. Nizami is an Oriental poet by his origin, but the universality of his messages makes him universal. From that point of view, Dante could be considered an Azeri poet, because his actually values are applicable to all nations. Nizami Ganjavi and Dante Alighieri happened to address not only their respective nations, but something beyond their nations. So while studying their legacy, we see a lot of commonalities. Comparative approach, ability to descend from the lowest levels to elevate to the highest ones. And there are some very specific peculiarities of both, is that they were writing for distant future, and the ideal social model they were actually advocating was the message for future. They created the models and formula that are still applicable, and it's far not by chance that both Nizami's and Dante's legacies became models for sources for ideas, and a number of imitations that followed in the centuries to come. Nizami was living throughout the 12th century and passed away in early 13th century. And as we see from historic sources, he spent most of his life in Ganja. He never traveled anywhere beyond Ganja, but his 5 poems stretch from India. The responses to his poems were coming from as far as India, from 13th century all the way through the 20th century. The responses to Nizami were coming from all over the world, even though the person himself never left his hometown of Ganja. And so it means that it started a great interest. It enjoyed a great interest in Europe. So that brought to the school of Nizami. The same holds true with Dante, particularly the history around his Divine Comedy. And the impact, like in case of Nizami, is not limited to the national level. It goes beyond the national boundaries and grows one of the global phenomena. And while like in Russian literature that may seem also different, but studying Russian or Azerbaijani literatures, we can see the impact of Divine Comedy, Dante's Divine Comedy. Russia, one of the scholars who was seriously studying Dante Alighieri was Professor Danchenko. He said that Dante was never a chronicler or a silent observer of his respective time. No, he was a participant of the turbulent events of his lifetime. And there were many responses to Dante coming from Russian literary traditions. And the way Russian literature benefited from that is very versatile and very multifaceted. In the end of 19th, early 20th century in Azerbaijan, we had a play, Saint Javid, whose trilogy was the Owl, the Devil, the Iblis, and actually he seems to be a person of a different mentality, yet his poetry reverberates with Dante's Divine Comedy. Speaking of similarities between Nizami and Dante, well, it's also the issue of years. Nizami penned his poems in Persian, which was the dominant language of the Orient. At that time, both ethnic Azeris and Kazakhs and Osman Turks and Afghans and Amir Khosrow Pahlavi living in India, they all were using Persian. That was the common language of poetry. That made that provided the grounds for dissemination of their works in their lifetime. Therefore, shortly after Nizami's death, the response to his poetry came from as far as India. And well, it was a good response. So question may arise, why didn't Nizami write in his mother tongue? Well, Latin in Europe was something like English for the world today. And the same thing, Persian was the language of poetry and Arabic was the language of science. And Nizami indicates why he didn't write in Turkish. He said, I'm ethnic Turk. However, in this dark environment, writing in Turkic will not provide me the reader's audience. So my works will never be disseminated that much. And Dante decided to write in Italian. He could write in Latin, so he would get immediate popularity. However, the difference is that he started writing in Italian, and that paid off centuries after, but he was one of the founders of this literary Italian language. And therefore, the comedy lives on, as well as Hamseba and Nizami. And it's one of the most popular works in Europe. And the impact of both Dante and Nizami is sensible 700 years after Dante's death and over 800 years after Nizami's death. And that shows that they succeeded in touching upon eternal values that made their works immortal, really. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Hussein. This was very rich and really made a common point between these two great geniuses and their global meaning. It was quite wonderful. Thank you very much. Very important information for all of us. So, but we have to go on. And now I would like to introduce the next speaker is Dr. Michael Barry from American University of Afghanistan, USA, Italy. I don't know where it is situated, but anyway, it's somewhere. And your theme is The Emperor and the Widow, a story common to Nizami and Dante. So you are most welcome.
My little exploration of some startling, absolutely amazing common points between the poetry of Dante and that of Nizami&Ganjawi. So I hasten to assure everybody that with the destruction of our university in Kabul, we are trying to revive, and one of the places we have chosen is Venice. Venice, so open to all the world and which has hosted so many unhappy people fleeing persecution. Allora mi sia concesso di fare la presentazione in inglese perché penso che sia la lingua la più comune fra tutti. So, Adela, I will be asking you to go through these images, please, rather quickly, since our time is limited. And so we start with the master of the most exalted rank. We start with the Sheikh Ali Maqam, with Nizami, and if we see that the manuscripts of Nizami's works are so beautifully illuminated and illustrated, it was because his civilization truly considered him, after his death, the Sheikh Ali Maqam, the master of most exalted rank. And I'm thinking of Dante's Onorate l'altissimo poeta, honor the most high poet. So you have illuminations like this, paintings illustrating the stories of Layliu Majnun as far southeast as India, as in this 18th century Indian example, or on the other side, you see here on your right, Khosrow discovering Shirin bathing in the mountains. And I simply want to call your attention to the symbolism that the painter Shehrzada, disciple of Behzad, but working in Tabriz in Iranian Azerbaijan, brought to this apparition of love to which Mrs. Pacella was calling our attention. The tree of life appears in all the multiplicity of its colors to shelter the holy person. I take these words from the great early 13th century Spanish Muslim mystic Ibn Arabi, who was much commented upon in 15th century Herat and Tabriz, to mean that the tree of life recognizes the holy person who is a lady. Here is Nizami as painted by the great Behzad, reminding us in late 15th century Herat that Nizami was taken seriously as a teacher. And when he addressed his poetry to his own son, Banasihate Farzande Khish, this is an idea that Nizami derives from the Nicomachean ethics of Aristotle, that the poet should be a teacher and that we all become his pupils, like the own son of Nizami Ganjawi. Next, Adela, please. Next, Adela. So here again is the idea of Nizami as a teacher. The two Herati painters, Qasim Ali and Behzad, represent Nizami himself as the school teacher in the school where Qais, future Majnun, under the wonderful tree of life, will write his first poem in love of Layli, who has just been revealed to him, and she sits underneath a mihrab in this school, which is also set in a mosque, because she is the focus of his contemplation, very much like Beatrice for Dante, and we are in the world of common courtly love. Next. Next, please, Adela. Yes, this is again, okay, this is again Layli, represented by the master Muhammadi of Herat, some 100 years after this painting, but which he contemplated and meditated upon. And we see Layli as Queen of Heaven, a true Beatrice. She is set within her mihrab. Here she wore red, like the red princess of the Haftaikar, and here she wears a royal crown and the narcissi in her hands, called Abharul Ashiqin in scholastic Arabic, the narcissus of the lovers, means these are the eyes of all her male lovers through which she looks at herself. Indeed, she's a personification of the divine, and the eyes of the world are the eyes through which the divine looks upon the divine. So this is a very profound mystical meditation with the idea that Beatrice and Layli have so much in common in inspiring the poet who will become mad for love of her. Next. Next, Odila, please. Yes, so here is a detail of Nizami himself as the schoolmaster, and this very much corresponds to the image which became crystallized in Eastern Islamic art after the 15th century of Nizami as, in fact, himself a personification of the active intellect, the angel who conveys to us higher truths in the appearance of a wise old man, as described by, as the Italians would pronounce it, Avicenna, meaning the great philosopher Ibn Sina of the 11th century of the Common Era. Next. Next, please. Yes, the detail of Nizami's face as imagined, meaning endowed with all the majesty, but none of the weakness of old age. Next. Here again, by Behzad, the great mosque of Herat, and the character here, we'll look for the detail. Next, please. Next. Next, again, that was Behzad himself. Next. Next, please. Yes, come lower. Yes, here again is this character that we could call the Sheikh of initiation. He is the Aql Fa'al, or intellectus agens, the agent intellect, the thought of God, initiating us into higher wisdom, associated with Nizami by the late 15th century in Herat, called by Jami and the other writers of Herat as absolutely the Sheikh Ali Maqam. Next image. And this is underlined by an extraordinary painting from 1486, illustrating the Turkic language works of the Prime Minister of Herat, Mir Ali Sher Nawai, who here dreams that he has been guided into paradise by his own mentor, who is Jami, who is the true spiritual master of the kingdom of Herat. It is a relation very much like Virgil with Dante. In other words, Jami is introducing Mir Ali Sher Nawai, who hides his hands out of respect in front of the great Nizami, here perceived again as the absolute center of all past poetry, as in Dante's Limbo, where Virgil introduces Dante to the great poets of the pagan past, with Homer in the center, Onorate l'altissimo poeta. Here we can say that the Sheikh Ali Maqam, the Lord of the most exalted rank, who shows talatuf, who shows grace, to this new poet who writes in Turkic when all the others were writing in Persian, much like Homer, with Virgil guiding, greets Dante as a new member in a new language among the great Greek and Latin poets of the past. And there is no doubt that we are in paradise, since even the moon here points downwards in reverence for Nizami, which of course no moon looks like in a real sky. Very quickly to go through the poets, here is Amir Khosrow of Delhi, closest to Nizami, then Ferdowsi, Saadi, Sana'i, Anwari, Khaqani, and standing humbly, Hassani Dehlawi, Hassan of Delhi. Next. Next, please. So here again is a close-up by the painter Qasim Ali of Nizami as the active intellect, as the supreme teacher. Next. Next, please, Adela. And this is a recreation of this archetype by Muhammad Ali of Golconda in early 17th century India, which reveals how the Indians had received this archetype of Nizami representation into their own very Persianized culture. And we can identify this wonderful poet, now in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, as Nizami himself, the Ayna-i Ghaib, the mirror of the unseen world. Next. Next, please. So very important in these Indian representations of Nizami is the idea that Nizami is a teacher poet who does not really depend on the favor of kings. Instead, kings search for his favor. So Nizami here is shown in this 1595 manuscript copied for Emperor Akbar. He is shown presenting his Khamsa to the Shirwan Shah, who is the Azerbaijani ruler, but represented much younger than Nizami, as if the ruler himself becomes a pupil to Nizami, the teacher. Next, Adela. This idea, which is very important in this early mid-16th century illustration to Jami's poetry, shows the idea that the poet is instructed by the angels if he is truly inspired, like Saadi or Nizami or Jami, and a disciple looks one night through a chink in the doors and discovers where the inspiration of the poet truly comes from. Next. I'm going to go through, I have to ask you to go next because these are meditations on why Behzad was chosen to illustrate Nizami, but we'll go on. Please go to the next ones. I want to come to, yes, please, this idea that thanks to the example of Behzad in Herat, the illustrators to Nizami, like Daulat, the Indian painter, here in 1607, 1608, is painting illustrations to the text of Nizami, which has just been copied by Abdur Rahim Ambarin Kalam, the scribe, so inviting us to consider the poetry of Nizami, not only through the literary analysis, but through the visual comments brought by the artists of the civilization. And I will go into this regarding Dante as well. Next, please. So this is one of the beautiful illuminations in Akbar's manuscript of the Khamsa, introducing the Makhzan al-Asrar, or treasury of secrets. Next, it's called a Shamsa, a sunburst. And this will be from the Khamsa, which will be the focus, the main focus of this talk. So there's the famous story here painted by Behzad of the Khalifa in the bathhouse, who will be instructed into higher wisdom by the humblest person in the bathhouse, his bathhouse attendant. And this is a very strong theme which runs through all of Nizami, that the higher the king, the more he has to learn from the humblest, poorest person in the kingdom. And I just go very quickly through these images to point out the remarkable afterlife of this painting, when we see the wonderful abstract patterns of the decoration. Next. Continue. It even inspired Matisse. Now, we'll go through this image. Here's an Indian illustration, again, to Nizami's Makhzan al-Asrar. Take the next one, Adela. Take the next one and the next one, because now we're going to enter into the heart of the discussion. So here is a theme of the Makhzan al-Asrar, here beautifully illustrated by Mir Mosawer in Tabriz in early 16th century Azerbaijani, Iranian Azerbaijan today. And the idea is the book is an instruction for kings. And here the king, Khosrow, the Sasanian ruler, who was ruling when Muhammad was born, wonders what the owls are saying in the ruins. And the minister, Bozorgmer, explains to the king, the owls are congratulating you, O king, because you have so misruled the kingdom. You have extracted so many unjust taxes that the people are ruined and they are all fleeing to India and other countries. And so we owls have lots of ruined places in which we can nest. And the king understands the lesson and then rules with justice. I'm going to insist on this parable. We find it in many places in Islamic literature. The earliest place I've been able to find it is in the works of al-Mas'udi, who wrote in 10th century Baghdad. It's a Sasanian story, and it reminds us that for the scholars of Nizami's time, the Sasanian Persian Empire was not a kafir or infidel empire. Instead, it was an empire that was brought together by God for God's purposes in order to unite humanity, and that Muhammad should be born when Khosrow was king between the Euphrates and the Indus. It's an idea which we see the Islamic scholars, especially the converted Iranian scribes of Abbasi Baghdad, very much borrowing, I think, from what the Christians had done after the Christianization of the Roman Empire, when the Christians began retroactively justifying the Roman Empire because, as Dante says in De Monarchia, it was God's will that Christ should be born under Emperor Augustus, who had just unified the world in order to prepare humanity for the coming of the Christian message. The secularization of the Roman Empire in medieval Christian civilization, and very well summarized by Dante in De Monarchia, and the retroactive Islamization of the Persian Empire that we see, for example, in the poetry of Nizami, are remarkable cultural parallels. Next, please. Next, please. Next, please. Okay, next, please. So here I come to the main story, and I'll have to go very quickly. Next, please, Adela. Give me just 2 minutes, please. Here is the story of Dostani Pirizan ba Sultan Sanjar, Pirzane ra setame dar gereft, dast zado damane Sanjar gereft, meaning a poor woman had faced oppression, and she seizes the bridle of the horse of Sultan Sanjar, who is the greatest emperor of his 12th century day, begging for justice. And the emperor says, I have no time, I have to keep on moving. And the old woman, who is the poorest person in the kingdom, tells the king, if you do not give me justice, you are not worthy to rule. And the king listens. And it's actually a portrait of the ruler of Herat himself, in this case, Sultan Hossein Mirza Baykara. And we're reminded of what so beautifully put it the poet Horace, mutatis nominibus de te fabula narrator. Just change the names. Of thee the tale is told. So we just go through the images and you will see the remarkable convergence. Wonderful representation of the same story by Sultan Muhammad in Tabriz with the tree of life and the bursting forth of the sun of glory.
Great. I'm sorry.
Just the Dante images. Just go quickly.
Only one. We have to continue.
Okay. Just go quickly. Just one more. Dante, the widow in front of Emperor Trajan, another name for the same idea, in front of the Palazzo Ducale in Venice to remind all the senators and the Doge himself that justice must be granted to the poorest person in the kingdom, as we see in so many illustrations of Dante. The origin of the story I finally found in Greek. Just keep on going. The story is finally found in Greek, and it was something that actually happened with Emperor Hadrian in a hurry, stopped by a poor woman and forced to grant her justice. And this was transposed from these ancient images.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's very sorry. We could continue forever. That is so fascinating. You are a very rich presentation. Absolutely wonderful. I thank you. I didn't know that the Lady Magnum, this opera, which I saw once in Baku Theatre, is based on Nizami as well. So it's fantastic. Really, thank you so much. And then we have to continue immediately because time is running so fast. And we go to the last speaker of our session, who is Rahila Ibulayeva, our close colleague. We thank you very much for organizing this important meeting and inviting people here. And you are from Baku Slavic University, of course, and your theme is the medieval concept of emanation and semiotic parallels on an example for the works of Nizami&Dante. And you speak in Azeri or in English?
Okay now?
Yes.
Is it okay now?
Yes.
You hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what is emanation? We can see various approaches to this. And one of the representation of idea, reaching the source, reaching the core of life, to be enlightened, to be enlightened means to be equal to be knowledgeable, to wisdom. And one of them is represented in literature, as well as in religious beliefs and philosophy. It is in literature, in symbols and hagiography. And emanation, first of all, briefly, what is approved to understand mainly, it is something which originates of or issues from a source. And one of the important points is of understanding the emanation idea. That is evolution which goes from less to more perfect, while emanation also approved like a series of descending stage. So it is something unchangeable. And I put here some parallels, semiotic parallels of emanation before and after medievality to understand, to great thinkers, to rethink emanation. It is God's manifestation to flow from, in symbol of wisdom and beauty, in both for Dante and Nizami. The other point is horn. I decided to also touch this visual element because in Nizami's Iskandername, Iskandar Zulkarnain, he is usually by myth, and then by Nizami, he is two-horned Alexander. And I am just highlighting main points. If then you have any questions, I will try to answer. We have one more parallel from Christianity, who is the horned Moses. If you remember, in Michelangelo, he is depicted with two horns. And it was until 1601, before Saint Clement's translation of Vulgata, but before it was, since 5th century, for 1,000 years, it was based, this horned Moses were based on Hieronymus' translation of Vulgata, because Hieronym tried to check it with original, and in Hebrew it was one of the meanings of horn. So horn in the meaning which is equal to be enlightened, to be knowledgeable. One more sacred person, but before Christianity, before monotheistic religions, we find in Odin. Odin is with three horns, and it is also a drinking utensil for Vikings. And it is based on the vibe. It is related with wisdom, because Odin knows how to get these three horns where is the mixed blood of Kvasir, the knowledgeable person, with honey. One more parallel for enlightened emanation is also before monotheistic religion. It is from Hinduism, Matsya, the horned fish, and this is one of the 10 avatars of God Vishnu. And one more we can find in monotheism, which is the shofar horn in Yom Kippur, the Hebrew New Year. And the other emanation symbol is virgin and beauty in literature. In the literature case, the Shirin, Nushaba, Leili, Seven Beauties by Nizami, and parallels by the way, I never meet their parallel with Martinius Capellas, because if you remember, this is from the 5th century, his marriage of Philologia to Mercury. And the liberal arts, general education in European universities, the Western universities are based on this liberal arts, which was highlighted by Martinius Capellas, this tractate. And who is Philologia? Philologia, there is a symbol of proto-image, we can tell, of Shirin's renderers heroes, Shirin and Nushaba, because Nizami is writing in his Khosrow and Shirin that I got my knowledge from Hebrew, from Nasrani and Pahlavi manuscripts. So we can tell that he also was familiar with this Nasrani way, which is Philologia. And Philologia was a beautiful girl who passed knowledge to Mercury, which knowledge, and they became then part of liberal arts general education. It is one of the points. So what is before Nizami? I am telling what is before Nizami&Dante, medieval period. And one more is also, which is represented by Dante's Empyrean. It is depicted in Hebrew understanding, which is Ein Sof, infinite light, or Ohur Ein, nothing less, or infinity in Judaism. And it is also some parallels in Sufism. Parallel we can find also in visuality, which is nymph in Christianity for saints, like in astronomy, we know that it is the circular band around sun or moon, and it is for sacred people and also related with light, which means enlightened, emanated. And now I am putting here some samples, just making visual for you. This is Matsya, how it is depicted. You see here the fish avatar, one of the 10 avatars of God Vishnu with his horn. We find parallels with Matsya in 2 ways. Matsya, as the same like Moses, he saves sacred scriptures, Vedas in Hinduism, as well as Moses did it, scriptures. And the second one is Matsya is depicted with horn, and Moses is depicted with horns. Then, plus we can find also Matsya horn, physical why it was important when he saves first man, Manu. It is the like a parallel image for Adam during the great deluge from Indian subcontinent. So it is the important one, and in depiction it is at least it was translated like a luminous appearance. Again, it is related with being luminous. And Odin, I already told about it, about Kvasir parallels. And we have one more. I am sorry because I think it is a little bit small, but I found from National Library of Israel in internet, the Iskandar with 2 horns. Here, Iskandar is depicted with 2 horns, and it is related to 18th century. And this is, by the way, Odin's image with 3 horns, and it is also, as I told, it is also in cultural and social anthropology, both of Vikings and also the Caucasus, drinking wine. And in case of Odin, it is blood, but we know that in Christianity, blood also symbolizes Jesus' blood. So it is mix of blood and honey. So, and all of 3 horns have this one. And in symbolism, it looks like this. And one more, linguistically a religious framed parallels we can find again. It is how Gustav Dore illustrated the Empyrean by Dante. It is parallel to ascension, like mirage, because it is beyond the physical being. And of course, it is after purgatory level. Purgatory, it is called by Dante, but menevi temizlenmek, edeb qaydaları. So following the moral rules, you can reach something very high. It is in Christian, it is in Muslim rules. And one more parallels of the Ein Sof, I can come briefly to it. Ein Sof is the emanator for 10 Sephiroth. If you remember how it looks like in Dante's case, but 10 Sephiroth, it's also from Judaism. And it is Kabbalistic tree of life. Sephiroth, other name is Kabbalistic tree of life. And the name Ayin Sof, we never use it for Sufism, but we have in Azerbaijani and Turkic languages many related words with this. For example, Ayan oldu, Eynek, Eyni, and it comes also from the Sumerian, Akkadian words, and then they are depicted in Semitic languages like Hebrew, Arabic, which means the same, and the other meaning in semiosphere, how in Merkoulova highlighted in semiosphere of Lotman, we can find also not the same, also the endless, so infinite light. In cognitive linguistics, so we can add one more line, which is in Hebrew, sof, which means at last. And one more also, it is from the name Sof, Hagia Sophia, you know, and from Greek, it is in Latin and Roman languages like wisdom, the root Sof. This is which we can tell within framework of linguistics. The purgatory is here, and the other one is from Polytrich of Hieronym Bosch. And now, which is in medievality, we talked about what is at the same time like medievality and visuality, but all of based on translation of religious sacred texts and previous myths which were framed in religious texts, and what was in different areas apart from monotheistic regions. And now we can tell what was before it, how they shaped during Dante and Nizami. There is one nice word in Russian, blago. It is possible to translate like happiness, nobility, but blago means, I think, something more. I think the question of what is the core of life, the meaning of life is most related to be blago. Blago means when you are doing the best, but never hurting others. And if you want to be never hurt otherness, it is not the simple question how we understand, because happiness, to reach happiness is sometimes in some countries constitution. State constitution, for example, like in American Constitution. So to be happy is the right of everyone. But what is the happiness? Happiness is to be noble, and one of the main things for being blago, for being noble, for reaching this one, as we told beforehand, it was a woman, and of course, love, it is related with woman. For Dante, Beatrice is the guide to paradise in social and anthropology and etiquette. I am usually giving to my students trauma in conflict between individual desire and social frames. And then to rethinking how, for example, Dante or Nizami rendered this realistic love, realistic motive, like wise people in their text. Because you know that Dante never married Beatrice because she already was married. But he reached her wisdom only after life of Beatrice. In case of Nizami, it is mostly based on real love, his real life, and she is a guide to ethical life. In this case, we can follow Freud when he learns, learns Shakespeare Hamlet's case, why he killed, and we can use this psychoanalysis of fall in love with someone's image, because as you remember, Shirin loved Khosrow through his picture image. The same was Khosrow. And in love sickness and love melancholy, in this diagnostic, which comes to the medical history most strong way in 1943, learning this love sickness based on medieval text, literary text, and based on Shirin, we can teach our students, for example, psychoanalytical fall, because first stage of love melancholy is when you love someone's image, which is not the real person, not his real features. So Shirin loves him, but not Farhad. Even Farhad is more higher people by morality, but Shirin chooses because she loved only the image, but not Farhad, who cuts down the rock to bring the milk river to Shirin's castle, committed suicide for the sake of Shirin when he was deceived that Shirin died. Let me just make a remark why I think that it is important to keep this both real and profound life, knowing this psychoanalytic or medical history side, because during this, by the way, only during this research, it came to my mind from our student period. We were all young and everyone was falling in love. I remember one of the boys, and just at this time, rethinking Farhad, I found parallels between Farhad and this our student friend who killed beloved lady, and he was a very, polite guy, and how he did it. So it is again the case of Freud, how to analyze when the person at young age can kill someone, being crazy, mad, or insane. By the way, it is also the point for, I think, our translators, in which case Farhad is crazy, mad, or insane, or Majnun is crazy, mad, or insane, because insane is in Azerbaijani ruhi khasta, which is the spiritual illness, and made crazy is maybe mostly related to the ranking person. And in this way, another kind of beauty image who transforms, enlighten the person, in this case of man, he's not the ruler, he's the normal person, Majnun, the image of Layli, which also goes back to Lilith from the Apocrypha image, and who is totally different, and to Virgin Layli, and she is, according to Apocrypha, one of, to tell in modern day terms, that she's like kind of prostitute. But he totally changed Lilith image, making her virgin and making her devoted, totally different image. It is totally in context of Nizami's emanation, Nizami's educational principles. But Lilith also, but Lilith at the same time, not only Huri, not only heavenly person, it is something for real love. And we can also take this text if we want to explain to our students, like part of general education, like philology teach to Mercury in Martinez Campbell, how to keep, how to treat love melancholy stage. So there is always in social anthropology and etiquettes and between love, trauma and conflict of individual desire and social frames, one of the topics which comes from this conference. So love between happiness and the idea of God. I will not tell here more about philosophy, but in philosophy we can find many ideas about nobility, blago from Plato to Aristotle, to Socrates. And emanation, now I am concluding in this text. In our research, we submitted Ayin Sof and Sufi poetry, and enlightened Shirin through beauty, Layli through beauty. And in case of Sultan and Iskandar, they are not from beauty, but from women. And in this case, nobility for Nizami is not only being beautiful, being from Evgenika, as I told yesterday about it. Just if you can be old, you can be slave, concubine, but what is your feelings and inside features. And also just resembling you that we told about Odin with 3 horns, Matsya horned fish, and emanation in Christianity, which is brilliantly depicted by Dante. In Christians, again, by Michelangelo, the best one. So he did his sculpture before Saint Clementi's translation in 17th century, and also in Hinduism Kabbalah. So I am very happy to find semiotic parallels between various religions, framed, unframed, approved, non-approved, monotheistic, pagan, but to find many parallels to understand that people always have the same feelings, the same, many parallels, not the same, but many close depiction of things. And let me just tell, we are doing our conferences to talk about our problems, which troubles we have in our society. And it is good that we talk about love, because not only to women, to men, I think to everyone who is around us, to human being, it is one of the prisons. So to teach love, then to help our students to manage their feelings between trauma and social etiquette. The other one could be how symbols have an impact to alphabet, and phonetics alphabet can be a nice symbol. And it was possible to put also paradise, parallels between Hebrew Pardesh, Muslim Parda, but it is a topic for another conference. I think we will continue it with our semiotic conferences. But it is for reaching something, the core, for visual image, creating semiosphere for translation studies and learning psychoanalytics. And then at the end, I can tell it is not my opinion. I came to this opinion, but I made the same which was told before me. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the author, but I am totally agree with him when he told that having studied materials of Sufism for almost 30 years, I realized that in reality, in Sufi literature is behind mysticism. So all profile life, everything is based from humans. And Dante, both Dante and Nizami, they were real people. They came through these feelings, but like wise people, because of their age, they depicted what we should learn, what we must learn, I think, nowadays. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, for this absolutely excellent presentation with this emanation of kind of transcendence, which transcendence, something, emanation coming down. So it was fascinating, and all your philological and cultural details, which were very, very convincing indeed in this case. So thank you 1,000 times, and also for organizing work for this wonderful meeting. Now the organizer told me that we should really finish without any discussion. I'm terribly sorry, because I'm sure that these speeches have evoked many interesting ideas in your minds. So
maybe 10 minutes, because as I said, the next should start at 12:20, and we have maybe 7 minutes and 5 minutes for breaks. If someone wants to stay for discussions, what do you think about it? Just suggestion. You are the chair, so you can decide yourself.
Well, I have message from the organizers that no.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I think I have to follow the orders of the Congress, because you must have a coffee break. They told me some kind of break, but well, it's always in these important meetings that you have so many ideas that you can't just react immediately. But I hope there might be another opportunity for discussion. And as Rahila Taylor told that we can continue this theme. I mean, in some other semiotic congress, there are big events coming soon. The World Congress of Semiotics and many others, so that you might have this opportunity. Well, I thank once again for all of you. It was really these were very big revelations. Revelation, I would say, of these two great poets, Nizami and Dante, and I wish you really great continuation of this symposium. So thank you very much once again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We'll be in touch soon.
Yes, okay. Sure. Okay.
I'm so sorry if I have some mistakes in justifying time zones. I'm so sorry about it. Okay.